In the barren, waterless deserts of Ghor stood a fortress, Sefrud. Water was scarce, the roads lay deserted, and above it all hung a sky perpetually veiled in a mist of death. When the Tartar army arrived here, it chose hunger as its weapon before the sword. Every grain, every head of livestock, every stored provision in the surrounding lands was seized, so that not a single breath of life could reach those trapped inside. But the gates of Sefrud remained shut, and its defenders stood ready like steel. The war began. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and after every assault the Tartars returned empty-handed. Yet inside the fortress another war raged, the war of hunger and thirst. First, the livestock began to fall. Lack of water and fodder claimed them one by one. 24,000 animals perished. Then the ruler of the fortress, Malik Qutabuddin, made a decision that only a ruler with a living conscience could make. All remaining livestock were to be slaughtered immediately. Their meat was to be dried and preserved, and the carcasses of the dead animals were to be thrown outside the fortress. For a time, this secured food for the besieged, but what about water? After months of resistance, the grim news arrived. The remaining water would last only 40 days. Malik Qutabuddin ordered that every drop be measured and distributed. Each person received 34 tolas of water per day and night, along with an equal portion of grain. The ruler himself took only 28 tolas because he owned a horse, the same horse he rode while patrolling the fortress walls. Even the water used for ablution was not wasted. It too was given to the horse. Through restraint, patience, and discipline, they endured for another 50 days. Then, one day, the guardians of the water reserves arrived, trembling. Only 1 day's water remains. After the prayer, Malik Qutabuddin gathered all the men of the fortress in the courtyard. He gave no command, he only sought counsel. Fight or surrender. According to the account of Qazi Minhaj al-Siraj, the decision taken there remains a burden on the chest of history to this day. It was resolved that the next morning, every man would kill his own women and children so that they would not fall prey to Tartar brutality, dishonor, and cruelty. After that, all men would take up their swords and hide in different corners of the fortress. The gates would be deliberately opened, and when the Tartars spread inside, from every direction, at once they would attack until their final breath. That day was a day of oaths and resolve. People embraced one another, shed silent tears, and prepared themselves for martyrdom. That night was the night of decision for Sefrud. Inside the fortress, people were counting breaths, not of life, but of martyrdom. Every face was silent, every heart ready, when suddenly the sky turned. Clouds gathered, thunder split the air, and then that which no one had hoped for. Rain began to fall. Then snow covered the earth. Those who had stood at the very threshold of death were suddenly embraced by life. Joy returned to the eyes of the half-dead besieged. Praise and gratitude flowed from their lips. Every hand moved, every vessel, every water skin, every container rushed to collect water. When the rain and snowfall ceased, the fortress possessed a 2-month supply of water. The Tartars witnessed this scene. They understood that the siege had now become meaningless, and so they withdrew, postponing the campaign until the summer.
Winter ended, and as promised, the Tartars returned. But this time, the scene had changed. Sefrud was no longer empty-handed. The defenders had gathered such reserves of grain, water, and fodder that they now stood ready for a long war. For 2 months, the Tartars hurled themselves against the fortress walls. Every assault failed. Every stratagem proved useless. At last, they chose the path for which they were known: deceit. They announced a unilateral ceasefire, signaled their withdrawal. The people of Sefrud were both astonished and relieved. Perhaps the calamity had passed. To display their good faith, the Tartars allowed merchants traveling along the highway to enter the fortress and trade. For the people of Sefrud, this news became a ray of hope. The gates were opened, merchants began to come and go, but the Tartars were lying in wait. On the third day, in a single moment of negligence, Tartar soldiers slipped into the fortress behind the merchants. Whoever stood before them was struck down by the sword. Fortunately, the guards reacted in time. Before the enemy could reach the gates, they were forced back and driven out, and the gates were shut once more. Yet, in that sudden attack, many Muslims were martyred, and 280 people were taken captive by the enemy. After this betrayal, the Tartars sent a message: "Come to us, pay the ransom, take your captives back." But the lions of Sefrud refused and unsheathed their swords. The enemy gathered all its strength for a final assault, but the response was just as fierce. From the walls, stones rained down. The stone throwers crushed dozens of Tartars. Archers shattered their ranks. Raiding volunteers emerged through hidden paths and fell upon the enemy. Bodies kept falling, and the Tartars kept retreating. At last, before this impregnable stronghold, their courage broke. Helplessly, they gathered their equipment and chose the road of retreat. Sefrud was no longer just a fortress, it had become a symbol of steadfastness. Firozkoh, another steel gate standing on the land of Ghor, a fortress before which even power fell silent. 20,000 Tartar soldiers gathered around it. For 21 days they stared at its walls, pressed from every direction, yet Firozkoh did not bend. Then came what history repeats again and again. When all earthly supports collapse, the sky delivers its verdict. Winter descended. Snow sealed the roads, and divine help came down as a freezing wind. The Tartar tents trembled, their morale shattered, and they were forced to abandon the siege unfinished and retreat. Firozkoh once again proved itself unconquerable. And then comes Fort Tulk. Here, the Tartars did not arrive with swords alone, they came wielding cruelty as a weapon. 10,000 helpless captives, men and women alike, were driven forward under guard. Trenches were dug, emplacements were built, human beings were used as living shields. With full preparation, the siege began, and it continued for 8 long months. But the defenders of Tulk did not tire, did not bend, did not sell themselves. They answered every assault, foiled every stratagem, and did not allow the enemy to advance even a single step. At last, the same fate was repeated, the fate that had become the destiny of Ghor's fortresses. The Tartar beasts left this place as well, frustrated, empty-handed, and defeated. Tulk proved that when faith itself becomes the wall, not 8 months, even centuries are not enough.
While battles were raging on multiple fronts, Sultan Jalal al-Din was moving at lightning speed toward southern Khurasan. He had already received intelligence that Genghis Khan was assembling a massive army and war supplies in Talaqan. Advancing forward, the Sultan first turned toward the southern Khurasan region of Sistan, Sigistan, the land known today as Nimroz and Farah. While the Sultan was encamped at Bust, a crucial piece of news arrived. His cousin, Amin al-Mulk, the former governor of Herat, who had narrowly escaped the Tatar onslaught, was nearby with 10,000 soldiers. The Sultan immediately sent for him.
When Amin al-Mulk arrived, the Sultan embraced him warmly and invited him to stand shoulder to shoulder in jihad fi sabilillah against the Tatars. Without hesitation, Amin al-Mulk accepted. He placed his life, his army, and his sword entirely at the Sultan's command. Thus, Sultan Jalal al-Din, Amin al-Mulk, and their companions sat together, heads bowed in council, and began planning a decisive strike against the enemy. Wherever the Sultan passed among the Pashtun tribes of Khurasan, he was received with loyalty, honor, and love. Under the Sultan's banner, the number of mujahideen grew day by day. This force was no longer merely an army. It had become the hope of the future of the Muslim Ummah. With the addition of Amin al-Mulk's soldiers, the Sultan's strength reached a point where he could challenge the Tatars independently on any front. The Sultan regarded every mujahid as an architect of Islam's tomorrow. The gleam of their swords felt like lamps of hope in the darkness of despair. Yet, the Sultan was not a commander of emotion. He was a commander of strategy. He decided that the beginning must be from a front where the enemy would suffer the greatest loss, while the Islamic army endured minimal damage. This would place pressure on the Tatars on one side, and on the other, restore courage to a terrified populace, so they could stand firm in the great battles yet to come. These events were not merely the stories of fortresses, they were a test of the conscience of the Ummah. Sefrud taught that when all roads are sealed, honor carves a path. Firozkoh showed that when human strength is exhausted, the heavens begin to speak. Tulk proved that no matter how organized oppression becomes, it shatters before faith. And Sultan Jalal al-Din, he was not merely a commander. In a world collapsing into ruin, he was the final line of hope. This was an era when the Tatars fought more with fear than with swords, and the Muslims first conquered their hearts before lifting their blades. But this story does not end here. Now the battlefield is about to change. The struggle is no longer only of fortresses, it is a clash of minds, Sultan versus Genghis. The battles that lie ahead will decide not merely victory or defeat, but the very direction of history. In the next part, how does Sultan Jalal al-Din stand firm before the Tatar flood, and which battle forces Genghis Khan for the first time to stop and think? The story continues, because as long as oppression survives, resistance remains alive. Next part, coming soon.